The first time she spoke, the courtroom laughed. Not loudly, just enough for the people in power to feel superior and for her to feel alone. Izzy Monroe stood at the defense table. Small frame swallowed by a borrowed hoodie. Sneakers squeaking on the polished tile floor. She didn't belong. At least, not according to the judge, the jury, and every attorney in the room. Behind her, a prosecutor cleared his throat, amused. Someone in the gallery whispered, "Is this some kind of joke?" She could hear it all. She just didn't care. Judge Preston Hale leaned forward, resting his chin on one hand like he had all the time in the world. "Miss Monroe." His voice slow, smug. "Do you even understand where you are right now?" Izzy lifted her chin. Her curls were messy, tied back in a rush. Her fingers clutched a folder of handwritten notes, edges worn, corners bent from days of flipping and rereading. But her voice, steady, clear, unshaken. "Yes, Your Honor. I'm in a court of law, and I'm here to defend my client." A beat of silence, then laughter. A woman in the front row shook her head. A junior prosecutor let out a cough that was really a laugh. Someone in the jury box even smirked. "This isn't a high school debate team, Miss Monroe," Judge Hale said, letting the words hang. "And you're not qualified to be here." She knew he'd say that. They always did. She could feel the judgment thick in the air. The disbelief, the irritation, the quiet hope from the man beside her that she might still try. Thomas Bell, accused of embezzlement, a man no one wanted to represent, except her. Izzy placed her notes on the table with care, then looked up at the judge. "If this court believes it's better to silence me than to hear the truth, then say so. On the record." That stopped everything. No one laughed now. Not the attorneys, not the jury, not even the judge. Preston Hale blinked just once and sat back in his chair. He didn't smile anymore. And for the first time that morning, Izzy Monroe wasn't the one on trial. She didn't come to be liked. She came because someone's life was on the line, and no one else cared enough to fight for it. Before she ever set foot in a courtroom, Izzy Monroe had already watched the system fail once. It was 2 years ago. A cold Thursday morning. She was sitting in the back row of a federal courtroom, watching her brother, Eli, stand trial for a crime he didn't commit. Wire fraud, conspiracy, a paper trail that never pointed to him. But they made it fit anyway. She remembered the way the prosecutor spun the narrative. Clean, precise, full of holes disguised as facts. She remembered the judge's face. Cold, detached. Like Eli was already guilty the moment he walked in. He was 21, first in their family to go to college, studied economics, loved math, built an app to help small businesses budget better. And for that, he got too close to something he wasn't supposed to see. Izzy hadn't understood it all back then. Not the legalese, not the rules, not the loopholes. But she understood injustice when she saw it, and she never forgot the sound Eli made. That sharp inhale, when the gavel dropped and the sentence came down. 7 years, just like that. After the verdict, they didn't even let her hug him, just handcuffed and gone. The courtroom emptied fast, but Izzy sat there frozen. The same bench, the same lighting, the same silence that said, "You don't matter here." That night, she opened Eli's old textbooks, then case files, then public records, then everything she could find. What started as grief turned into obsession, and obsession turned into knowledge. She didn't just read about the law, she absorbed it. She dissected it. She started writing her own case summaries in the margins of notebooks. At night, when the world slept, Izzy built timelines, traced documents, memorized arguments. She learned how prosecutors think. She learned how defense attorneys win. She learned how to recognize the quiet sound of someone being silenced. So, when she met Thomas Bell, a man too broke to afford a lawyer, too tired to fight anymore, she recognized something in his eyes. The same resignation she'd seen in her brother's. And she knew this wasn't about being a lawyer. This wasn't about being allowed to speak. This was about refusing to stay silent when the system demanded her silence. She didn't wear a suit, she didn't have a license. But Izzy Monroe had something no one else in that courtroom did. A reason that couldn't be shaken. The moment Izzy started laying out her first argument, the courtroom began to turn on her. Not in big ways, not yet, but with 1,000 tiny signals that told her she didn't belong. Judge Hale sighed loudly. Not because she was wrong, but because he didn't want to hear her voice again. The prosecutor rolled his eyes every time she cited a precedent. The clerk typed slower when she spoke. A bailiff in the corner crossed his arms and smirked. It wasn't just resistance. It was a coordinated silence designed to shrink her confidence one microcut at a time. Izzy held her ground. She laid out the timeline. How Thomas Bell couldn't have accessed the accounts he was accused of touching. How internal transfers in the company didn't match his login patterns. How a senior executive had mysteriously resigned just days after the funds disappeared. She even handed out copies of records she'd pulled from public filings, highlighted inconsistencies, referenced matching IP addresses. But no one leaned forward, no one nodded. No one cared. Judge Hale finally cut her off, his voice sharp as a knife. Enough. Sit down, Miss Monroe. You've made your point. Izzy didn't move. Your Honor, That wasn't a request, he snapped. The room went still. A beat passed. Then, slowly, Izzy stepped back, her face unreadable. The prosecutor stood next. Didn't refute her argument. Didn't touch a single point she made. Instead, he smiled and said, "Let's not forget who's representing Mr. Bell today. A minor with no legal standing, no education, and no authority to speak here." He turned toward the jury, as if to say, "You can ignore everything now." And the damage was done. Whispers rose behind her. A juror glanced at another, eyebrows raised. Someone in the gallery snorted, loud enough to sting. Izzy sat down slowly. She could feel it happening in real time. Her truth being dismissed not because it was wrong, but because it came from her. A girl, too young, too poor, too black. She stared straight ahead, didn't blink, didn't swallow. Let them think they'd won this round, because she still had cards they hadn't seen, and one of them was about to walk through the courtroom door. She had learned early, the system doesn't scream when it crushes you. It smirks, it yawns, it tells you to sit down. Judge Hale called for a recess, just 15 minutes. But in that time, everything shifted. When the courtroom reconvened, a new player entered through the side door. Tall, neatly dressed in a gray suit with a smirk that didn't quite reach his eyes. Brandon Tate, a financial consultant, former compliance officer at Bell's company, supposedly neutral. But Izzy had seen his name before. In the footnotes of reports, in the metadata of a redacted memo she hadn't been able to open. He wasn't neutral. He was a bomb, and the prosecution had just dropped him into her lap. "We call Brandon Tate to the stand," the prosecutor announced, with all the glee of someone lighting a match. Tate was sworn in. Then came the performance. He spoke clearly, confidently. He described Thomas Bell as erratic, unreliable, untrustworthy. He told the jury how Bell once forgot his own password, how he argued with the finance team, how he acted suspicious in the days before the funds vanished. It was all anecdotal, all designed to paint a picture, not of guilt, but of incompetence. enough to blur the lines, enough to make the truth foggy. Izzy stood slowly, her breath measured. "Mr. Tate," she began. "Can you confirm the date you left the company?" He blinked. "That's in my exit paperwork. Just the date, please." He cleared his throat. "January 8th. Izzy nodded. "So, you weren't employed during the week the funds disappeared?" Tate hesitated. "I was still on call as a consultant, but not formally employed." Another pause. Then, no. Izzy walked to the evidence table, pulled out a page of timestamps from the login server. "You submitted this internal report on January 11th. She held up the paper. "From inside the company firewall, using your credentials," the courtroom murmured. Tate stiffened. "Isn't it true," Izzy continued, "that you maintained access to systems you weren't authorized to use?" "Objection!" the prosecutor barked. "She's making unproven allegations." "I'm asking a question," Izzy shot back. Judge Hale raised a hand. "Watch your tone, Miss Monroe." Izzy looked at him, eyes steady, didn't speak, just turned back to Tate. And that's when he cracked. He glanced toward the prosecutor, then toward the gallery, then down. "I was told to keep my access active," he muttered. "It wasn't my idea." Boom! The courtroom buzzed. Judge Hale slammed his gavel. "Enough!" But Izzy saw it. For the first time, the jury leaned forward, and someone in the back row nodded. The system had thrown its first punch. Izzy had just ducked and fired back. It started with a whisper, a quiet rustle near the back of the courtroom. Izzy barely noticed it until a hand tapped her shoulder. She turned. It was Noah, her childhood friend who'd been helping her dig through financial records for weeks. His face was pale, eyes wide, and in his hand, an envelope. "Where did you get that?" she whispered. "Someone dropped it at my door this morning." No return address. Just one word written across the seal. He held it up so she could see. "Truth." Judge Hale raised an eyebrow as she stepped forward. "Miss Monroe, Your Honor," she interrupted. "New evidence has surfaced. I request permission to submit it immediately." "From what source?" "Anonymous. But the contents could materially impact this case." Hale hesitated. The prosecutor objected. But the courtroom was already shifting. Leaning in, Hale sighed. "Proceed, but cautiously." Izzy opened the envelope slowly, heart pounding. Inside were two documents, a signed internal email thread between Tate and a board member, and a USB stick labeled Account 72, Archived CCTV. She plugged it in. The courtroom screen flickered. Then, grainy footage from a lobby security camera. The date, the morning of the alleged theft. There was Thomas Bell walking into the building at 7:14 a.m. The theft, according to the timeline, occurred at 6:41 a.m., 33 minutes before he arrived. Someone gasped. The prosecutor scrambled through his papers, searching for a rebuttal. Judge Hale leaned in, squinting at the timestamp. "Is that verified?" he asked. Izzy nodded. "From the company's archived security feed, extracted through an account previously deleted by Mr. Tate." The courtroom stirred again. Suddenly, Tate stood up. "This is a setup. She hacked that—" "Sit down," Hale snapped. His voice wasn't sarcastic anymore. Izzy turned back to the jury. "The only reason Thomas Bell is here is because someone else needed a scapegoat. She let that hang. And now, Your Honor, we have a reason to believe this wasn't an isolated case." She held up the second document, a printout of a sealed case file number, the one tied to her brother. Judge Hale narrowed his eyes. "Miss Monroe, what are you saying?" Izzy's voice dropped. "I'm saying this might be the second time Brandon Tate has framed someone. And I can prove it. The truth didn't knock. It kicked the door down and walked straight into the light. Court recessed for the day. The judge called it unusual complexity, but everyone knew the truth. The room was cracking. Izzy stepped outside, the cool air hitting her face like a slap. She could still feel the weight of the USB in her palm, like it was burning. Across the parking lot, a car idled. Black, tinted windows, unmarked plates. Noah glanced over. "That's been sitting there since this morning." Izzy didn't respond. She just watched as the back door opened, and out stepped a woman in heels sharp enough to cut concrete. Slick black blazer, hair pulled into a knot so tight it looked painful, eyes like glass. She walked straight up to Izzy, uninvited, unapologetic. "Miss Monroe." Her voice was smooth, dangerous. "I'm Veronica Creel, senior counsel and fixer for the firm that once employed Brandon Tate." Izzy crossed her arms. "Fixer?" Veronica smiled. "I don't like loose ends." She handed Izzy a plain white envelope. Inside, a check with 6 zeros. Izzy didn't flinch, just folded it once, then twice, and held it out. "You dropped this." Veronica didn't take it. Her voice dropped lower. "You think this is about your client? Thomas Bell was disposable. Your brother. An inconvenience. You're the mistake." Noah stepped forward, but Izzy held up a hand. "I'm not for sale." Veronica's smile thinned. "Everyone has a price, even if it's not money." She turned to leave, but her final words floated back like poison. "Be careful what doors you open, Miss Monroe. Some of them don't close." That night, Izzy couldn't sleep. She sat in her brother's old bedroom, converted now into her home research bunker. Documents pinned to corkboards, red threads, sticky notes, an entire web of deceit. And at the center, Victor Grant, a name she hadn't dared say out loud yet. CEO, political donor, public philanthropist, and secretly, the man who buried her brother's case. The one who signed off on Brandon Tate's contract, and possibly the one giving Veronica her orders. Izzy's phone buzzed. A message, no sender ID. "If you don't stop now, the next thing buried will be you." She stared at it for a long time, then hit save. No reply. She turned back to the wall of evidence. Her eyes landed on a photo. Eli and her, arms over each other's shoulders. Graduation day. She whispered to the empty room, "I didn't start this for war. But if war is what they want..." She pinned the message to the wall, right under Victor Grant's face. "I'll bring the fire." They thought she was just a girl in a hoodie. Now they knew. She was a fuse with nowhere left to burn but forward. The courtroom was packed. No more empty seats. Reporters lined the walls. Phones buzzed in pockets, waiting for something seismic. Thomas Bell sat quietly beside Izzy, his hands folded, eyes hollow from weeks of wait. But today, he looked at her differently, like a man who finally saw a sliver of sky through concrete. Judge Hale shuffled into the chamber, his robe still flawless, but his tone no longer smug. He adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. "In light of new evidence, verified by federal analysts, this court finds insufficient grounds to continue the case against Mr. Bell." A beat, then the gavel. All charges dismissed. Gasps, tears. Thomas grabbed her hand, holding it like it anchored him to the earth. But Izzy didn't celebrate, because she saw the prosecutor's expression. Not anger, not shock, something worse. Fear. She turned and saw Veronica Creel at the back of the room, standing, watching, not defeated, just calculating. Izzy knew then, this wasn't over. That night, she returned to her apartment, tired but wired. Noah had cooked, sort of. Microwaved something vaguely edible. He poured 2 glasses of cheap champagne. "To surviving the machine," he said. They clinked glasses, and for a few minutes she let herself laugh. But the moment broke when her phone lit up. A call, blocked ID. She hesitated, answered. "Izzy Monroe?" a man's voice asked. "Yes. This is Detective Ramirez, Internal Affairs. We've reopened case number 317 in B, your brother's case. We'd like you to come in." Silence. Her knees nearly buckled. "We found sealed files, signed off by Victor Grant. It's bigger than we thought." She couldn't speak. The call ended. Her hands trembled. Not from fear, but from finally seeing the crack in the wall that buried her brother. But the crack came with consequences. The next morning, a window in her car was smashed. No theft, just a warning note. "Stop digging, or get buried with him." She filed a report. Ramirez promised protection, but Izzy knew better. She sat in her room that night, ankles crossed, hands bandaged from a broken glass. Thomas Bell was free. Her brother's case was finally in motion, and the truth had started shaking loose. But so had the danger. For every person freed, someone else in power lost a layer of protection. And those people, they fought dirty. She looked in the mirror, saw herself, still in a hoodie, still underestimated. Good. Let them think she was just a girl. Because the girl they mocked in part 1, she just won. But at a cost no one saw coming. Justice never comes clean. It comes clawing, screaming, and bleeding. But when it does, it leaves a scar worth carrying. 3 days later, the story broke nationwide. Teenage girl outsmarts corrupt legal system. No law degree, no permission, just proof. Social media exploded. Clips of Izzy's courtroom arguments went viral. Reaction videos, hashtags, petitions. But the moment that stuck wasn't the dismissal of charges, wasn't the judge's gavel. It was the final image. Izzy standing alone, hoodie zipped up, walking out of the courtroom, head high, eyes forward, unapologetic. Somewhere in Atlanta, a girl named Mia watched that clip on her cracked tablet. She was 13, lived in a shelter with her mom. Never thought people like her could fight the system. Until now, in Chicago, a black father showed the news to his daughter. "That's how you speak truth," he said. The girl didn't answer. She just nodded, slowly, with purpose. Back in Izzy's city, a mural went up overnight. Spray paint, newspaper clippings, and one bold sentence. She didn't wait for permission. Izzy didn't paint it. Didn't even know who did. But when she passed by that wall on her way to the subway, she stopped, traced the outline of her own eyes, and smiled. An invitation came, then another. News shows, law schools, even the State Bar Association. But she declined most of them. Instead, she accepted one, to speak at James Monroe High, the underfunded public school where she and Eli had studied. The auditorium wasn't fancy. The mic crackled. The folding chairs wobbled. But the room was packed. Kids who looked like her. Teachers who remembered her. Her mom in the back row, wiping tears. Izzy stepped to the podium, took a breath, and began. You don't have to be invited into power to challenge it. Sometimes, the loudest voice in the room is the one they tried hardest to silence. She didn't talk about glory. She talked about fear, about rage, about nights she thought no one would ever listen, and how she kept speaking anyway. Somewhere in the crowd, a boy leaned forward. Skinny, awkward, eyes too big for his glasses. And in that moment, he didn't see a teenager in a hoodie. He saw a storm, a fighter, a blueprint. Izzy Monroe never asked to lead a movement. She just refused to shut up. And because of that, 1,000 others started speaking. Sometimes justice walks into court. Sometimes it walks out. But the real story is what echoes after the door slams shut. If this story made your heart race, if it reminded you that courage doesn't always wear a suit, and that justice can begin with just one voice refusing to be silenced, then this channel is for you. At KaYi, we don't just tell stories. We unearth the ones they try to bury. Stories of resilience, of defiance, of ordinary people doing extraordinary things in the face of impossible odds. Because sometimes the system doesn't break from the top. It cracks when the ground beneath it begins to rise. So if you're still here, if you're still feeling that fire, subscribe, join us, not just to hear stories, but to carry them forward. Because someone out there needs to know that no seat is too high to be questioned, and no voice is too small to matter.